So I'll introduce our panelists here today. So I have Asir. He's Principal Program Manager on the Java and Azure team, basically the Java and Azure guru. He takes care of everything and anything that has to do with Java and Azure. We have Bruno Borges. He's a Principal Program Manager on the Java platform team. Basically, at this moment, at least, it's mostly centered around the OpenJDK build that we have. So you can ask him all kinds of questions, about that. I have Ed Bruns, who is the principal architect. He's my engineering counterpart. I'll introduce myself last. But you can ask him any questions on Java EE on Azure, essentially. We also have Martijn Verburg. He is the manager of the platform group. Again, you can ask him all kinds of questions on OpenJDK. And we have Theresa Nguyen. She's a senior program manager on our compute team, mostly specializing in JBoss EAP workloads, and somebody that works with Red Hat very closely. So any kind of JBoss EAP or Red Hat related question, you can certainly ask her. And lastly, myself, I'm Reza Rahman. I'm a principal program manager for Java and Azure. More or less, I had the same role as Asir does, but I guess a bit more focused on Java EE on Azure. But today, actually, I won't be answering any questions. I'll be asking the questions because I'm the host. So we do have a set of curated questions that I'll ask here in a moment. I don't see a whole lot of questions that has come in, but do feel free to put in your questions. I will take a look at your questions and sort of weigh to see if they make more sense or whether the questions that we've already curated make sense. We have quite a few very good curated questions, actually. So these are the sort of topics, as you probably have guessed from the speaker list that we'll be covering. So these are the Microsoft OpenJDK build, VS Code for Java. Hopefully, most of you know that VS Code actually supports Java these days. Any questions on Java on Azure? It's a very, very broad portfolio. It includes things like Azure DevOps and Azure Functions that also has support for Java. Anything Spring on Azure, we work very hard to ensure that the Spring framework and things like Spring Boot are run extremely well on Azure, so you can ask questions on that. And finally, you can ask questions on Java EE on Azure, and these are your traditional application servers like JBoss EAP, Wildfly, WebSphere, and WebLogic, and all those, how they are supported on Azure. So I think without further ado, let's get started with the questions. Let me just take a brief look at how we're looking like with the list of Q&A questions. If there aren't too many, I think we're going to get started with the curated set of questions. And in fact, there aren't a whole lot, but there is one question that I think is fairly interesting that just came in. So I'll ask this. I think this is a question around OpenJDK. So I think this will be a good question for Bruno to answer. So the question is, would you consider making an Alpine or distroless Docker image? Implicitly, probably we're talking about OpenJDK. So what do you think, Bruno?
Hi, yeah, that's a great question. And so far we have got not enough feedback on the need for Alpine. And what we can say is that it is an interesting ask. It is an interesting question and use case for having very small Docker images, but officially Alpine support in the OpenJDK project is only available for OpenJDK 16 and later versions. And we want to make sure that OpenJDK on Alpine is fully supported and part of the OpenJDK project as well. So that's why we don't see Alpine support for OpenJDK 11 on the Microsoft Build of OpenJDK, but it's something that we are considering for OpenJDK 16 in coming soon. So do expect to see Alpine for 16 at least. And for JDK 11, we're going to evaluate what is needed to backport that sort of support or see how other vendors are doing that in a way that is reflects the Alpine support in the OpenJDK main project.
Okay, so next question is also an OpenJDK question. I think just to mix it up, I think it'll be good, Martijn, if you could answer this. Why should I use the Microsoft Build of OpenJDK versus Oracle OpenJDK?
That is a fantastic question. So first of all, to reassure anyone who is looking at using the Microsoft Build of OpenJDK, it is a drop-in replacement for Oracle JDK or any other OpenJDK out there today. We all meet the Java specification by passing the TCK. The reason why you would want to use Microsoft's Build of OpenJDK is, in particular, if you're an Azure user. And this is really to do with the support policy that we have around the Microsoft Build. If you're an Azure or Azure Stack customer with a qualifying support plan, you can pick up the phone and give us a call whenever you have an issue with any of your JVM issues from our build. Going forwards, you will also likely see that we will be enhancing the Microsoft Build for Azure workloads, and we'll be upstreaming most of that to OpenJDK. Where we're unable to, you'll see us clearly signposting that in release notes.
All right. Next question, I think, is for Asir. Why should you use VS Code as opposed to IntelliJ as a Java developer?
Oh, VS Code. VS Code is free. It's open source, it's lightweight, and it understands Java, right? VS Code also has extensions for all your popular tools like frameworks and app servers like Tomcat, Maven, Git, Gradle, Spring Boot, all the favorite ones, right? And it has extensions for Azure services. You can deploy to Azure services. It also has enough functionalities for developers who are working with Azure services, particularly when you're working with like SQL database or Cosmos DB, if you want to look up some data. It has all kinds of friendly tools. Now, if you're a developer like me and working with Java, JavaScript, CLI, SQL, VS Code is a great tool for you. It has everything you need for building those apps in the cloud.
All right, next question. I think, Bruno, it'll be good if you can answer this. Will the Microsoft OpenJDK build support Java SE8?
Currently, no. We do not currently provide a build of OpenJDK for Java 8.
Okay. All right. I think next one, I think, Asir, is also for you. Why should Java developers consider Azure?
So Azure has more choices. Did you know that Azure has managed services for Spring, Tomcat, and Java EE through JBoss? Azure Spring Cloud is jointly operated and supported by Microsoft and VMware. If you take JBoss EAP in App Service, it's jointly developed and operated, supported by Microsoft and Red Hat. Azure also has official offers from IBM for WebSphere, Oracle for WebLogic, Red Hat for JBoss. These are all jointly built and supported by Microsoft and these companies. If you're using Cache, Redis is available in collaboration with Redis Labs. Managed Elastic Service is available. Confluent is available. So you're all well supported by our excellent partners and their products on Azure. Azure is global. It's available in many, many regions if you compare it to any other cloud provider. Now, as a developer, you can build your tools, build your apps using the tools and frameworks that you love. Any choice. You can automate from idea to production using the choice of automation tools and platforms, whether you're on GitHub, whether you're using Azure Pipelines, Jenkins, GitLab, you name it, right? And you can monitor your apps end to end using your choice of tools, whether you're using Log Analytics, Elastic, Splunk, New Relic, App Dynamics, it's your choice. So you have all these choices. So that's one reason why Java developers should consider Azure.
All right, Martijn, so this is an interesting question. I think I'd like you to answer it. Are there any specific enhancements planned for the Microsoft version of OpenJDK that won't be upstreamed?
Yes, there's a whole classification where this can occur. So our policy is to upstream everything first. But because at OpenJDK, the Java 11 project in particular is extremely risk averse. It's been a long-term service release for a long time. It's a very stable code base, and even something as simple as a small performance fix that we applied for MD5, which impacted some of our Azure SDK customers. Despite it being accepted at tip, so for Java 16, it was not accepted in Java 11 because of the risk-averse nature. So you'll see us putting in a whole bunch of small enhancements like that in the coming years, which we will attempt to upstream. But if we're told no, again, we'll have to clearly signpost those to our customers.
Okay, so I think Martijn to some extent has answered this question already, but I see this question has votes. So I think, Bruno, I don't mind getting your take on this one. How does Microsoft offer commercial support for the MS OpenJDK build?
Well, what we want to make sure is that Azure customers and Azure Stack customers, if and when they see any sort of problem with OpenJDK, it may be even an existing bug that OpenJDK project does have, and them as customers, they can provide feedback to us and say, hey, this is impacting my Java workload on Azure. Can you please go and fix it? That's sort of the customer support that we can provide to those customers, and that would help us prioritize our backlog and put those requests into our backlog and fix those issues sooner rather than later, and provide those patches upstream to the OpenJDK project, as Martijn suggests, mentioned, and make sure that those patches are available in our build, if possible, even sooner than other distributions might have.
Okay. I think this is a good question for you, Asir. How does Azure support VMware Tanzu?
So there are two offers for you, right? So if you like to run VMware Tanzu directly on Azure, we have you can run it on Azure IaaS as a platform where you will be controlling from top to all the way down to the infrastructure. The other option we have is you have your Spring Boot apps running on Tanzu. We have an excellent managed platform in collaboration with VMware. It's fully built, operated, and supported by Microsoft and VMware. It's called Azure Spring Cloud, where you can simply deploy your apps and do not have to worry about any infrastructure monitoring or app lifecycle. Everything is taken care for you so that you can just deploy and focus on your business.
Okay.
Let me jump in on that one and give another perspective on the everything is done for you versus I would like to do some things myself. So the kind of solutions we're doing with Java EE is more currently enabled for PaaS as a service. So you're not going to get a PaaS. You're going to deploy something and then you could have your own PaaS. For example, deploying a WebLogic cluster that you will manage, and you could do that on VMs. You could do that on Azure Kubernetes service. But instead of having Microsoft run all of the stuff as it does in Azure Spring Cloud, you'll have more of the responsibility yourself. But on the other hand, the cost is also different. So we want to have a menu of options for Java on Azure that fit everyone's possible needs. So if you want a full expensive, more expensive possibly service that is fully white glove, full PaaS, then Spring is good for you. If you're willing to do more work yourself, maybe run it on Kubernetes, you're familiar with that, then you could deploy your Java EE stuff. If you want even an easier experience, you could look at App Service with JBoss. JBoss EAP is one of the things that we offer.
So that's a good segue for our next question, Ed. I think you should take this one. How does WebLogic licensing work on AKS?
Well, what we've got worked out with Oracle, and this is a part of the larger Oracle-Microsoft partnership that has been in effect since June of 2019, it's a bring your own license offer. So the licenses are portable to bringing to Azure. And the nice benefit there, again, if you do AKS, you're paying for the cost of AKS, which is really quite nominal to run a plain old AKS, depending on what node sizes you use and what other kinds of network capacities and such. If you need a lot of express route to get to your local data center, or you're running your database inside of VMs, that would be another set of costs. However, the Open Connect with Azure data centers and Oracle data centers allows you to run your middleware on Azure and continue to run your databases in the OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So this gives the sales teams from both Oracle and Microsoft the ability to find the optimal arrangement of pricing for each customer.
So Asir, we had a new question just came in. I think it's a very good one. I don't mind if you take a stab at answering this one. Do you have any pro tips to reduce the Azure function warm-up time for Spring Boot apps?
Warm-up time for Spring Boot apps, right? So many times what we saw is developers were trying to initialize lots of connections to databases, right? So that's definitely a place where you can sharpen it so that your speed of initial bootstrap is reduced, right? So that you can quickly start up, right? Then if you look at the Spring community by itself, right, they have put out plenty of tips for optimizing your Spring apps itself, Spring Boot apps itself, right? Like lazy loading. There are many JVM options. Dave Sire has put out a nice article, and he's done lots of experiments, right? So all of those apply when you're running in the cloud, where when it starts, it can start up very, very, very quickly, right? So those are all many of those steps. And the other piece that I want to call out is in Azure Functions, we have many built-in triggers and bindings. If you can leverage them, then what will happen is your Spring Boot app will be very, very thin. That way, when Azure Functions start spawning many instances of your Spring Boot apps, it will start very quickly, and the system as a whole, the platform Azure Function, it can take care of binding triggers instead of you trying to connect to Service Bus, or you trying to connect to a database, or you trying to connect to a Kafka, right? That's where when you take advantage of that point, it's the function, Azure Functions can come into play and speeden things up for you.
It's kind of analogous to what you see technologies like Graal doing. What you've just described us here is basically hand done ahead of time compilation, where if you know the services that you're going to need, you can declare, okay, I'm going to get these ready, have them warm and ready for me. So, but you're able to tune it more specific to your individual environment.
Right.
So we talked about JBoss AP on app service before. We do have a question here. And the question, I think this is a good question for Theresa. When will the JBoss AP on app service offer Goji?
We are looking at next month. Just waiting to finalize some details, but it's already out the door. You can actually use it right now. It's in a public preview. And you won't have product support, production support at the moment, but as soon as it goes GA, you can switch over. And with that, you also have options in there for 2 different SKUs. So just keep an eye out for that. So we'll make an announcement sometime in June.
Okay, so another question that's a variant of the question I think Martijn, Bruno, you've asked, you've answered before, but I think obviously we should clarify this a bit more. So Martijn, I don't mind if you answer this. Can I get support for Java desktop applications running on Windows with the Microsoft OpenJDK build?
This is a great question, and it really, we have to be clear here what support means. If you are using the Microsoft Build of OpenJDK and you want to run it on your Windows desktop, you can and you will get free updates every quarter. They call them the patch set updates, and we will supply that to you for free, and we will, make sure the installers work and all that good stuff. However, at this stage, we are not providing what we would call commercial support. So pick up the phone to Microsoft to raise an issue with Java on your Windows desktop. But we're very interested to hear from customers and hear about experiences. So yeah, please do come speak to us with your requirements.
So I think, Bruno, you're going to like this one. Can we get JavaFX support?
Well, we have Jonathan Giles we hired.
Yeah, what we can say is that OpenJDK, Microsoft Build of OpenJDK passes the TCK. And for that reason, it is a true Java SE platform. And JavaFX is a Java desktop framework that runs on top of the Java SE platform. So not only JavaFX, but any other framework for Java, whether it's server-side or desktop application, will run on top of the Microsoft Build of OpenJDK. So our JDK does support those sort of deployments and does support JavaFX for that extension.
Hey, Bruno, does that mean Java Web Start works?
Java Web Start is not available on Java 11 specification, and therefore JDK 11 does not support it.
Yeah.
So, Asir, I think this is a good question for you. How do you learn and stay up to date with Java on Azure?
That's a good question. So we are continuously innovating across the spectrum by providing you with newer services, newer features, offers, SDKs, Spring on Azure integration, supporting app servers, newer app servers, right? JBoss tools, support for popular APMs, all of these things are coming again, right? New things. So most of these announcements, they come through a Java at Microsoft blog. Also, some come through Azure blog. And we push out through Java at Microsoft Twitter handle. We have Java and Azure YouTube channel. We also have official docs where you can also see many of these details come out. We periodically run webinars as well. And we also reach out to existing customers through Azure Mail, right? So stay tuned. These are all many of the entry points where you can stay tuned. And over the years, we are going to figure out how to effectively communicate to you. It's going to be an innovation on our side.
Well, one other great thing.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I'd like to add to that because I work closely with Red Hat and enabling JBoss to run on Azure. We have the Azure the marketplace for JBoss EAP right now. That's live and available, and also for the app service. Going back to the question earlier, and it also runs on Arrow. And we work.
We also have the new Java landing page for Java for Azure developers we should talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bruno, you want to talk a bit about that? Java and Azure landing page, right?
That's a great one-stop shop for all of what people want to do for Java.
Yeah, I think I actually hit my mute on my side. Sorry. I was going to finish up as I've been working closely with Red Hat to bring the education aspect of things to customers. So we have a series of webinars and workshops that are free for attendees. You can sign up and you'll have an instructor from Microsoft and Red Hat leading the workshop. They're hands-on. We also have like developer guides and tutorials that are periodically being produced and put out there. And like what Asir said, they will be announced on either the documentation or blogs. But keep an eye out from Microsoft and Red Hat for these joint type of educational materials.
And I think this is an interesting question for you. Will Microsoft become a Jakarta EE member?
That is a very good question, and I'll answer it strategically. Microsoft is in the business of being customer obsessed. So our customers are leading us, and when the customer demand shows that it makes sense for us to engage with that, we will certainly try to do it. In the meantime, we are staying up to date on all of the developments. For example, you may see elsewhere in Build, we have some announcements regarding running Open/WebSphere Liberty on Azure Red Hat OpenShift and also Azure Kubernetes service. And by doing that, we are enabling you to run Jakarta EE on Azure just as a native, perfectly fine thing. So the capabilities are there. As far as getting back to the good old days of when I was a spec lead, I would love that, but we'll see if it makes business sense to do it.
Okay, so there's actually questions that keep coming in. I think I'll ask this one. It has a decent amount of votes, and it's a Red Hat topic. So, Theresa, do you mind telling us how does Azure support Quarkx users today?
We're engaged with Red Hat and discussing this and talking with customers on their roadmap and needs to bring Quarkx onto Azure. So it's an early discussion phase, but we are aware that there are interests out there and looking at possibly bringing it in, and now looking at to see where we can bring it in and how.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. I think this might be a good one for Bruno. It's a little bit of a curveball, but I think it's an interesting question nonetheless. Is WSL or native Windows more preferred for Java developers?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because there isn't really it's really a preference of the developer. What we can say is that Microsoft does recommend that the development of the Java application happens on an IDE or editor that runs on Windows. If you do want to test your application, how your application will behave on a Linux environment, or integrate with other perhaps native components, or maybe JNI or some other like native API calls, then you have Linux right there in the WSL terminal for you to evaluate and test. So that's the power of WSL on Windows. You have Windows for developing your application. You can use any other Windows native application that is available to you. You can use for playing games if you want. But if you want to have access to an easy access and quick access to a Linux machine, WSL is right there. And it's a Java application. Once you build on your IDE or using Maven on Windows environment, you can just easily run the jar file on the Linux environment through WSL. And one thing that we did announce recently is even support for Java desktop applications, or actually any GUI application on WSL. So if you are developing Java desktop applications, and we had the question about JavaFX, you can actually run the JavaFX application through WSL and see how that application would behave on a Linux environment, for example, to test file system access and other things, and see if the application is working fine both on Windows and on Linux. All of that without having to leave the Windows environment or going through a separate hardware, separate laptop, or even starting a fully fledged VM on some sort of virtualization software. So that is a true power of the WSL for Java developers. You have both worlds right in front of you.
Well, there's another aspect of Visual Studio Code that does really well with this. If you start Visual Studio Code on the Windows side or on the WSL side, it will use the built-in remote extension, the remote toolkit, to make it just work. So I use VS Code on the WSL side all the time, and it's very smooth.
So here's a question that has a decent amount of votes also. I think, Asir, it would be good for you to take this one, I think. So this is, why should Java developers consider Azure DevOps as opposed to Jenkins?
So when you're working on Azure, right, you can build end-to-end automation from idea to production using any automation tools and platform of your choice. If you're using Jenkins or GitLab today and like to continue your journey on Azure, more power to you, you can do that, right? You have all the building blocks for that. If you like to use Azure DevOps or GitHub, right? We have all the pieces for you as well, so that it is your choice, right? So typically when customers come to Azure, we see them build multiple pipelines, and they are broadly categorized into 3 of them. They provision using tools like Terraform, ARM templates, and CLI. All of them you can use in Jenkins or GitLab, any all Azure pipelines or GitHub Actions, right? You can do that. They build them, they build and store their jars, vars, all of them in the Artifactory. And then they deploy. Even when you deploy, that's a separate class of pipelines where they can use it in CLI and Jenkins, or they can use GitHub Actions, or they can use Azure pipelines, right? Now, the key thing here is it is your choice. Whatever you feel comfortable, we have that for you.
All right, so I think we're doing pretty good in terms of the questions. There's a few others. I think I did see one interesting one I think is worth answering. So I'll ask this to Bruno. I'll ask this to Martijn, I think. What security tools does Microsoft offer for its Java build? If any, are they free, or does it require a paid license? I couldn't find any information on the Microsoft site.
That's an interesting question. So security tools, that's quite a wide, a broad community of tools that can fit inside that space. When it comes to the security tooling that we actually test our own build of Microsoft Build of OpenJDK on, that's proprietary internal tooling to Microsoft, and we don't discuss those. For external tooling, the folks just rely on the typical tooling that's out there with the open source community today. So at this stage, we don't have any specific plans to release any security related tools for our OpenJDK.
Okay, I think this is the last question I think we're going to do for today. We're almost at the mark of our time here. So I think, Asir, why don't you answer this one? What is the integration story for targeting Azure services using Spring Boot applications?
What is the integration stories, right? So when you have Spring Boot apps, you can run in many destinations on Azure. You can run it on virtual machines or Kubernetes. You can run it on app servers, Azure Spring Cloud. There are many choices you have. Now, when you run these apps are interacting with data services, cache, messaging, eventing, directory monitoring. There are many of these integration points. So this is where I want to point out, over the last 5.5 years, we have been working with Pivotal, and now it's VMware, the Spring engineering team directly, to make sure that you have the best experience to interact with Azure services for data. For example, if you talk about data, it is like whether you are connecting using JPA or JDBC or R2DBC, you can connect with all of Azure data services like SQL database, MySQL, Postgres, right? Now, if you're connecting to MongoDB or Cassandra, you can connect to Cosmos DB using the Spring Data connectors. All of them are tested and it's working for you. Now, if you're connecting to Service Bus or Event Hubs using JMS or Kafka, certainly you can use those JMS template in Spring Boot, the JMS, also the Spring Cloud Stream Binders for Service Bus or the Event Hubs. You can use them to connect. So we have made sure all those choices are available for you on the messaging and the eventing front, right? Now for the cache, whether you are externalizing your session or using it for app cache or use high-speed searches, we have the Spring Data Redis or the Spring Session Data Redis. All those connectors you can use, and they're all tested with Azure Redis Cache service, right? Now, we have other class of customers who are very much focused on the end user authentication and authorization. So this is where we have worked with the Spring Security team to make sure that there is a starter and the auto configure are available so that you can enable enterprise-grade authentication and authorization using Azure Active Directory or Azure Active Directory B2C. So we have done the grunt of the work. All you have to do is just turn it on and configure, and it'll just work for you. Then the other important piece, which is managing secrets and your certificates. So this is where we have starters for Key Vault, right? Which all you have to do is just magically add and configure. All those secrets will be completely stored and managed in Azure Key Vault, and you'll just get hydrated like magic for you. Similarly for certificates with zero trust approach. So all the certificates are managed in Key Vault, and all you have to do is configure, and it'll be loaded in memory, and it'll be used so that nobody else can see those certificates and secret. Similarly for the integration with monitoring. Right? For example, if you're deploying into Azure Spring Cloud, the integration there is it'll just effortlessly connect and give you all the data and the insights. You don't have to do anything at all. So we continuously innovate. If you have more features that we should be thinking about, send it to us and we'll work with the VMware team to make sure that happens for you.
And one other important point on that is that all of those are done in a very Spring idiomatic fashion.
Exactly.
So all you need to do, if you're a Spring developer and you know already how to do the Spring way of doing these things, you just use the starter and then you've got Azure, the power of Azure right there at your fingertips.
Exactly.
All right, we are out of time and also out of questions, which is good. It's just about a happy coincidence, I think. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And also thank you to all of our moderators. I think all of our panelists. I think it was really good and nice audience interaction and nice set of questions. But do remember, we are always available. All of us are easy to access, pretty accessible folks. Right? We're out there. You don't have to wait for an event like this to catch us and ask a question.
Yeah, catch us on Twitter.
Our job is to answer your questions whenever and wherever. So wherever you can find us, you can ask us questions. It doesn't have to stop you. All right. With that, thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.